crime against the Jewish people.
Adolf Eichmann was one of the main Nazi organisers in the Holocaust. After the war, he was captured and put on trial in 1961. When they asked him why he did the horrendous things that he did, he simply explained that he was just following orders.
Come in contact.
But I had to obey orders, I had to do it.
This had been a common response seen from many of the Nazi officers just after the war when they were put on trial. They would all commonly say that they had no other option, they were just following orders. This led to American psychologist Stanley Milgram considering their answers and decided to run an experiment to study if this was the result of cruelty in people or fear and discipline under authority giving orders. The experiments began in 1961.
It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience? These are exactly the questions that I wanted to investigate at Yale University.
In the basement of a hall at Yale University, 3 months after the start trial of the German Nazi war criminal, Adolf Eichmann. The study was advertised in a newspaper and explained that Yale University would pay participants $4.50 just for showing up. These were 40 participants aged between 20 and 50, with mixed levels of job positions, all male. At the beginning of the experiment, they met with Stanley Milgram, who would claim to be just another participant that was randomly selected. They would pull straws for those who would be the teacher and who would be the learner. The teacher would be the person in the experiment asking all the questions, and the learner would be the participant that attempts to answer them. What the participant didn't know is that the game was fixed, so the participant would always be the teacher. Once the positions were established, Milgram, the learner, would go into the next door room. Here, the teacher could hear him but not see him. An authoritarian figure, who was one of the researchers, would then come into the room, dressed in a grey scientific lab coat to represent an authority figure.
The teacher would ask the learner questions in a word game and administer an electric shock when the answer was incorrect. He was told to increase the voltage with each wrong answer.
The electricity voltage started off low, but then reaches levels that would be incredibly dangerous for someone to receive. Although the participant didn't see the learner would make fake sounds as if he was in pain while he was being electrocuted.
Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer, horse.
Oh. Experiment, that's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
You refuse to go on?
The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor, and the so-called shocks harmless.
You're gonna get a shock. 180 volts.
When the voltage got higher and higher, the learner would then pretend to be begging to stop the teacher from shocking him anymore. Stanley Milgram originally hypothesized that he doubted anyone would go above the first 2 or 3 shocks, even when being told by an authoritative figure, but he unfortunately was very wrong about this.
Experiment, that's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
You refuse to go on?
The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor, and the so-called shocks harmless.
You're gonna get a shock. 180 volts.
The learner gave many wrong answers on purpose.
I can't stand the pain. Let me out of
You
here.
can't stand it. I'm not gonna kill that man, eh? I mean, who's gonna take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
When the teacher refused to administer a shock, the experimenter was to give a series of orders or prods to ensure them to continue. These were 4 prods, and if one was not obeyed, then the experimenter would read out the next prod and so on. Prod number 1 says please continue. Prod number 2 says the experiment requires that you continue. Prod number 3 says it is absolutely essential that you continue. And prod number 4 says you have no other choice but to continue. It is worth mentioning though that the participants were told in advance that they would still be paid for whatever the result of the outcome.
75 volts. I think something's happened to that fellow in there. I don't get no answer. He was hollering for less voltage. Can't you check in and see if he's all right, please?
Whilst they were electrocuting the learner, they showed strong signs of being uncomfortable and asking the researcher if they really should continue to electrocute him.
Do you have any questions now before we go into the next room?
No, but I think I should say this.
About 2 years ago, I was at the Veterans Hospital in West Haven. And while there, they detected a heart condition. There's nothing serious, but as long as I'm having these shocks, how strong are they? How dangerous are they?
Well, no, although they may be painful, they're not dangerous. Anything else?
No, that's all.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 75 volts.
Oh.
Soft hair. He kind of did some yelling in there.
Continue, please.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105 volts.
Oh.
Hard head. Just how far can you go in this thing?
As far as is necessary.
What do you mean as far as is necessary?
To complete the test. We've learned all the words. Please continue.
I sure don't know the effect of this thing, and I'm a little skeptical about electricity.
The experiment requires that you go on, teacher. Please continue.
Incorrect. 150 volts.
Oh.
Sad face.
Experimenter, that's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please.
Continue.
My heart's starting to bother me. I refuse to go on. Let me out.
Look, I don't know anything about electricity. I don't profess any knowledge, nor will I go any further until I find out if the guy's okay.
It's absolutely essential that you continue.
Well, essential or not, this program isn't quite that important to me that I should go along doing something that I know nothing about, particularly if it's going to injure someone.
Wrong. It's hair. 75 volts, Jim.
Oh.
You don't know.
Yeah. Please continue.
Cool. Wrong. It's head. 105 volts.
Oh.
I don't know. Wet. Wrong. It's horse. 150 volts.
Oh. Experimenter, that's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please. My heart's starting to bother me. I refuse to go on. Let me out.
Continue, teacher, please. Go on. Next word is
2/3 of the participants continued to the highest, most dangerous volts of 450. Milgram did this experiment with 18 different variations, and he got the same or similar results from all of them. However, there were some rather unique results driven from 2 of the variations. The first shocking discovery was in the social support condition variation of the study. This was where they brought in 2 other participants who were actors. They pretended to be teachers and refused to obey. The participant didn't know these were actors though. One actor pretending to be a teacher stopped at 150 volts, and actor 2 stopped at 210 volts. From this point, only 10% of the real participants agreed to continue. Another shocking discovery from the research was seen in a variation named 2-teacher condition. This was where the real participant could get in someone that they believed to be another teacher in the experiment, but was actually a researcher acting to press the button that would electrocute the learner. In this version, where the teacher didn't have to take on the full responsibility, but could ask somebody else to do it, 92.5% of the real participants shocked the maximum amount that they could, the 450 volts. What was concluded from all of this though? Milgram explained the behaviour of his participants by suggesting that people have 2 states of behaviour when they are in a social situation. Number 1 is the autonomous state, where people direct their own actions and take the responsibility for the results of their own actions. Number 2 is the agentic state, where people allow others to direct their actions and then pass off the responsibility for the consequences to the person giving the orders. In other words, they act as agents for another person's will.
I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one, slow. Walk, dance, truck.
How is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question.
Milgram suggested that 2 things must be in place for a person to enter the agentic state. The first is the person giving the orders is perceived to be qualified to direct other people's behaviour. as in, they are seen as legitimate. The second is the person being ordered about is able to believe that the authority will accept responsibility for what happens.
I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one, slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
There was a lot of outrage about this experiment from the public after the results were released. Many families of the participants were disappointed in them and couldn't understand why they would continue to shock the innocent person for just getting a question wrong. I personally believe that they weren't upset with the experiment itself, but what it represented. That it might not be as hard as everyone thinks for people to follow cruel instructions, and after all, the participants were just following orders.